Hi, Mickey.
Hey, Bob.
How you doing?
I'm doing good.
Looks like you got a haircut.
I'm glad you noticed. I thought it was going to be like a spouse thing where the husband doesn't recognize the wife had a makeover.
I'm not that kind of podcast partner, Mickey. I'll never start taking you for granted. But my daughters don't want me to get my hair cut, and that's too bad because it's in an awkward big hair phase and yet not man bun phase. You know, it's that twilight zone.
It looks great. It looks like it hasn't grown at all. You're taking some sort of hair retardant or something. Really, mine was like a bouffant. I was thinking of becoming a woman. It was great. But
what happened was I happened to get a haircut right before lockdown, and they happened to, for once, do what I always say, which is cut it as close as you can on top without it sticking up. They did it.
I always follow that rule.
That's often prescribed, rarely followed in my experience. So, but yeah, you've got it's a good look. You got a nice sheen on the top. It's whatever you paid for that was not enough.
Thanks, Bob. You think she cut it a little close on the top?
Well, here's my advice for you, Mickey. Quit looking down, and blinding us. Like when I only noticed
I'm looking up now.
Okay.
I'm looking up now.
Okay.
It makes me look like an imperious asshole.
Well.
Yeah. That's a setup line.
And I can't take advantage of it. So, wow. Another pretty weird week, right?
Very weird.
Is it weirder on the pandemic front or on the unfolding Civil War front?
Let's do the pandemic first. The media is ginning up a whole story that the pandemic is coming back, and it obviously is a little bit, but there are three competing causes for it, possible causes. One is people opened up too soon and kids are going out to bars and they're spreading it that way. The other is, it happens to coincide, the spike happens to coincide with these big demonstrations in violation of social distancing rules. And so the right is trying to blame the demonstrations. And then the third, the dark horse here, is immigration, Bob.
Actually, there's a fourth.
Okay. The third would be the worst states are all on the southern border. People are fleeing Mexico. Some of them are American expatriates. We don't really know who they are. But there's certainly some surge at the border, and those people are being shipped to the interior where they inflate the numbers in the interior, and they're being double counted because they get counted at the border and in the interior. So there are at least those three.
Wait, you're saying they're double counting their COVID cases?
Correct. The people that come across the border, the argument is...
where do you see these arguments? Why don't I see them? I should...
Because you don't read obscure CIS.
I don't go to VDR?
No, not VDR. Center for Immigration Studies. There's a guy named Todd Bensman, who's actually a pretty good reporter, who's been right on a whole lot. And he doesn't say it's for sure. He just suggests it. And, they count for at most a third of the increase, but it's a factor. And then there was a more polemical article by, I think, Daniel Horowitz in Conservative Review that I actually haven't read. I just saw it right before we went on air. But, and of course,
but it isn't just border states, right? Aren't there, a good...
Depends which map you go on.
I mean, Florida has an upsurge, right?
Right. If on some of the maps, like the New York Times map, it's throughout the South, and including the Southeast.
That kind of works against the border theory, right?
Right. But if you look at some other things where have the states gotten worse, and they color in the states, all the dark states are Texas, Arizona, California, New Mexico. So it's hard to. I'm just saying it's a possible factor, and it's the other thing is, of course,
I think Georgia too, actually, right?
It's a factor. It's a factor. People. It's a factor the press doesn't want to find the truth on. It's like when there was that mystery flu that was striking people in Colorado that seemed to correspond to a mystery flu south of the border. People just didn't want to figure out where that came from because they might not like the answer.
Is there a documented surge of immigrants at the border?
There are Border Patrol people complaining that people are streaming across the border and that they're ill. I don't think there's a numerical surge. I think the border numbers overall are way down because Trump is just sending them all back. Mm-hmm. There was a big controversy over whether Trump had 10,000 kids in detention, and Dara Lind, who is certainly not a person on my side of the debate, said no, they're just sending them all back. He only has less than 1,000 in detention. So the pandemic has been a boost to Trump's immigration policy, and the numbers are like about a tenth of what they were before, I think.
Well, I'd like to say I knew I could count on you to come up with an immigration-related theory for the upsurge, but honestly, I didn't anticipate it. Once again, you've exceeded my expectations.
But some of them are we don't know what the mix is. We don't know if they're U.S. citizens who just would rather be in a hospital in the United States than in Mexico. Those were the initial reports.
Don't forget Hezbollah.
They're from all over the world, Bob.
Mm-hmm. By the way, that was ironically for those who might take me seriously. Hezbollah is a favorite kind of Trumpist thing to throw out there. Oh yeah. Does future Trump campaign manager Steve Bannon talk about Hezbollah? Now that's interesting. Let me quickly though let's get to that, but let's allude to the fourth. Get to the fourth, right? I mean, first of all, the first two probably played a role. In other words, ending lockdown and the protests. And in fact, a couple of governors are rolling back the end of lockdown to some extent. They're walking a little of it back. Texas, I think Florida. There is a theory that was favorably aired by no less a stats guru than Nate Silver, and there's some statistics to support it. It's the air conditioning theory. It's that yeah, so the idea is that it's gotten hot enough in the South that everybody is staying indoors with their air conditioners on. So there's, windows aren't open. They're not getting cross ventilation, and they're not hanging out outdoors at cafes and wherever they would hang out. Whereas the preceding, so like back in, say, March, April, when this was like, smashing, the Northeast, in the South, it was, nice and, moderate in temperature, and they weren't yet turning on their air conditioners. There's actual stats to support this. That only works if they're in large groups in single air conditioned spaces. If they're just at home where they always were with their kids and turn on the air conditioner, I don't see where that's a big factor. If they go to the office. The office was always air conditioned. So what? I don't understand. No, it's not always air conditioned. I mean, anyway, I don't know the details. I would say that even if you're talking about transmission within the home, which is something that can happen or not happen, it's got to be more likely if you don't have the windows open. Yeah. But I think they're largely talking about people no longer spending much of their day just outdoors. The more time you spend outdoors, the less likely you are to get this. People have gone out of their way to say, "Oh, it wasn't the demonstrations." I think in Washington they did contact tracing, and they said, "Oh, no, it wasn't the demonstrations." That's a story the media wants to report, and so I discount those reports a bit. Keep in mind, the death rates do not seem to have gone up. I saw a report yesterday that said the death rate had spiked. No, but I couldn't see. That was a statistical anomaly. New Jersey went back and added like 1,800 cases retrospectively, and that screwed up today's stats. But while we're on that subject, just let me show you a quick graph. I'll describe it for our audio folks. So the bottom line is deaths, and the upper line is cases per day. Deaths per day, new cases per day. The top line does not correspond to the vertical axis. Don't think about the calibration. It's just to show you the general contours of the line. So as you can see, for a long time, they weren't far from parallel. There was a little more distance between them. So in other words, deaths were dropping by more than cases were dropping by, but it was pretty close. But then in the last week, 10 days, there's a big spike in cases, And, of course, there's a lag, right? So, like,
right.
10 days ago or so, like, these cases are translating into today's deaths. And you just got to think with a spike that big that next week the death rate will actually start to rise unless some of these drugs are going to...
Or else our treatments are better, or else right. The cases are mainly among the young.
That is a theory, too.
In which case, why aren't we... Well, if you look at the stats, the cases are overwhelmingly among the young, but there are enough cases in the middle and among old people to spike the death rate. Maybe.
It could be, testing is still growing. So some of the growing caseload could be
right, but not all of it.
No, not all of it. So,
are the young people who are out there partying and going to bars, are they building herd immunity for us? Is that a good thing?
As long as they don't give it to us in the meanwhile, as long as they stay in their herd until it reaches immunity.
So we shouldn't open the bars. We shouldn't close the bars. We should lock them into the bars.
We should lock them into the bars. This is what I've been proposing for months. Lock all young people up in small rooms and leave them there. But I think the medication, that steroid-based medication we talked about last time, they're probably still rolling that out in more and more hospitals, so that could keep the death rate from rising. The other thing is, just quickly, remember remdesivir, the thing that does seem effective, but you have to inject it. The company that makes it is now testing an aerosol version that you'd be able to administer at home, roughly the way people with asthma, do their thing.
Right. They're
testing that, in fact.
There's also a lot of hype. There's stories that ICUs are at 85% capacity. Well, they're usually at 85% capacity. Hospitals want them to run at 85% capacity or else they go broke. So it's not a scandal that the hospitals are 85% full. That's the normal operating range. Especially if they have the flexibility to postpone voluntary surgery in case it spikes. So the press is just desperate to have this thing come back.
Yeah, I mean, now I will say that graph that they've been circulating, where you see the America caseload go up and it's juxtaposed with the European Union's caseload, and then the European Union's comes back down, ours doesn't. That is a powerful graphic that could hurt Trump. I will say that I think to some extent that's actually due to the fact that we were slower to ramp up testing. The curve would look a little different, but not all that much less damning if it accounted for that. And anyway, our death curve looks somewhat worse than the European Union's and is persisting more at a higher level.
I don't quite understand it. What did the Europeans do that was so great?
Not have Donald Trump running things. I mean, they just had their shit together more. Now, of course, it was different nations with different policies.
What does having your shit together mean?
Well, they were more draconian and serious. I mean, I think in I don't know exactly what they did in Italy and Spain, but I think it was like people were not leaving their apartments, and that wasn't really the case anywhere in America. I just think they took it more seriously. They've got political leaders who don't go around saying, I don't wear a mask. Only uncool people wear masks. It's a lot of little things.
There's a weird thing with masks. I'm pro-mask, and the consensus this week, there are a couple of things that crystallize in the consensus this week. One is masks are great. Everybody should wear masks. Maybe it's the last couple of weeks. The other thing is Biden is running a brilliant campaign. We'll get to that. But the mask thing, it's a weird thing because some people say that the CDC was always weak on masks. They didn't recommend masks in earlier pandemics. And Fauci, when he said, you're right, I didn't really recommend masks before. He wasn't there. Some people claim he wasn't lying before. He actually doesn't believe in masks. It's Dr. Birx who believes in masks. And if you looked at the press conference today, Birx said wear masks. Fauci didn't say wear masks. There's some weirdness
but he didn't say not to. He just didn't.
No. But there's some weird, quirky, I think, CDC opinion there.
Well, it seems to be the case that if you could get everyone to wear a mask all the time, that would be really damn effective. I think there's now consensus on that. I mean, it would lead to a lot of people wearing them when they don't really need to, but still, if you could do it, because they're saying that it isn't so much about, it's not as much about touching surfaces as they thought it was. It's not as much about, even about outdoors transmission as they thought it was. Although if you're in a big, group outdoors, obviously things can happen. Did you hear about Novak Djokovic, the tennis player?
I know he's positive and he had some big party. That's all I know.
Well, he had a whole tournament and they just weren't doing social distancing, apparently. There's a picture of him and a bunch of people just jammed cheek to cheek posing for a photo. And, he's like within like three Grand Slam wins of being known as the greatest tennis player in the history of the game, like 3 or 4. And now the U.S. Open's coming up. Wimbledon was canceled. The U.S. Open's coming up in 2 months, and now he's got COVID. I mean, like serious misstep. But I digress. Anything else about COVID? No. So should we move to?
You're about to say. You were saying something about masks. The dirty of this. What they don't tell you about masks is that masks suck and they're unpleasant to wear. They make it sound painless. The same way it's the inverse of what they say about heroin. They say heroin is terrible, it'll kill you. They don't tell you that the high is pretty good the first times you try it. There's a reason why people become heroin addicts.
I don't think
there's a reason why people hate masks, because masks suck.
You should do that piece. Nobody's done the masks are the opposite of heroin piece.
I have 100 of them.
Oh, yeah, it's just a question of productivity, man. See, that's my problem too. So no, I don't think. I mean, it's true. If you're even taking like a brisk walk, anything where you're really breathing a little heavier than normal, a mask, in my experience, is kind of a drag.
I don't understand how the Asian countries wear masks constantly. It's everybody who's sick in Japan wears a mask. I
know, long-standing thing. Well,
yeah,
on subways especially, but it's. I don't think they do it all day. It's when they're around people.
Okay.
So, maybe to set up so you want to get into this Bannon as campaign manager thing? Is that before we get into Bannon as leading one side of the Civil War? I mean, he does need to make up his mind, I guess.
This is the stage where that happens to a lot of Republican campaigns where they say, and it's completely evident with Trump's, we need James Baker to step in and take charge. Where is James Baker? James Baker is still alive. He's 90 years old. They should bring him back. Trump obviously he sort of, there is no real clear strategy. He's sort of trying to go left to woo the suburban moms. So he sort of says things that seem to be pacifistic. Like yesterday on the town hall, he said, you don't have to kill people. I'm not like John Bolton. We don't have to drop bombs on people. And then he'll drop it. He also said this really weird thing about the wall where he said, Joe Biden will finish the wall. Well, why am I voting for Trump if Joe Biden's going to finish the wall? Obviously, there's no fucking way Joe Biden finishes the wall. Well,
it was weird when there was an interview. His son was interviewing him, and I forget the question, but the way Trump answered it was almost as if he had resigned himself to losing. The last part was like, but America will be fine.
Right. No, he's obviously thinking a lot about losing, and since he has no filter between what he thinks about and what he says, it comes bubbling up.
Yeah, you should have a word with him.
I don't think it means he's given up, but it just means this week he's thinking about what will my life be like when I lose.
Yeah.
If I lose.
After his rally in Oklahoma, and that had another weird line where he said, all he said about Gorsuch is, yeah, he's a good man. I mean, the crowd started booing when they heard his name. And
what's he supposed to say there?
Well, you would expect him to have some line like, just alluding to it and saying, you can't always predict what the people you're going to appoint are going to do. And that's all the more reason you got to appoint more. And we need 4 more years. I mean, that's obviously the message, but it was just an oddly kind of off-toned thing because the crowd is ready to boo. And he's,
you never know what Jared and the Karl Rove's, who are advising him, have said. Maybe they said, wait, the suburban moms like gay rights. Gorsuch came out for gay rights. Therefore, you can't really diss Gorsuch because it'll just turn off the suburban moms. I mean, he veers inconstantly between rallying his base and sort of these half-assed appeals to the suburban moms. That's why you need a campaign manager to say, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is our strategy. We're going to appeal to the base with these issues. We're going to move to the left on these issues. And you're never going to get them to be disciplined, but at least you could have in the ads, you could have a consistent strategy. And so. But
what strategy would Bannon bring?
I assume he would be nationalist on immigration and China, which they're going to be anyway. And he one of the great disappointments of Bannon was he was supposed to move left once in office. We were supposed to do infrastructure. We were supposed to have maybe even moves left on healthcare.
Even tax the rich, Bannon claims, was an aspiration of his.
Right. I guess healthcare was less of an aspiration, but tax the rich and infrastructure and maybe even, who knows, maybe the environment. Those are the obvious ways to go. And you would hope that Bannon would at least bring some of that, because he is about sort of establishing some sort of populist fusion that draws in working class Democrats. So that would be his mission, to draw in whatever Democrats he can draw in. And he fucked up before, so why shouldn't he fuck up again? But at least he'd be he also won the election before. So.
Mm-hmm.
And right now we have this weird thing where Jared is running the campaign, but he doesn't have accountability. The campaign's going south. Nobody blames Jared. They all blame Brad Parscale, however you pronounce his name. And Jared I guess they figure they can't get rid of Jared anyway. Why not? It's just sort of another half-ass thing where he has this advisor who doesn't take responsibility.
Now, are you the only one floating the Bannon as James Baker thing? I saw you did it on Twitter.
No, it's
all the people
everywhere.
The people who are talking about how immigrants are bringing us COVID are talking about that too.
No,
it's even broader.
There are only 4 people who are talking about that, Bob. You're just talking to one of them.
Okay,
but it's not an implausible theory. That's my point.
You mean the immigrants or the Bannon? The Bannon. No, it's not implausible.
The immigrants. It's not maybe it explains a bit. You don't know.
Well, the Bannon theory is not crazy either. I mean, Bannon has clearly been positioning himself to be a kind of advisor on his podcast. I mean, they're always kind of talking strategy.
Well, you listen to his podcast. You're his biggest fan. What does he say?
I am. I mean, first of all, I think if he were appointed campaign manager, you would see people mining the last few months of the podcast for him saying crazy incendiary things, just to, people on the left doing that with some success. Now, it's not like an administration position, so it's not like it would sink the deal.
A great lightning rod to take the fire away from Trump.
Maybe. But, it's... I don't know. What's he recommending? At first he was recommending kill COVID dead. But I mean, that's the thing, is because he wants to stay in Trump's good graces, he to some extent is following Trump's lead. So once Trump failed to do that, he was kind of suddenly he's kind of anti-lockdown, and that's awkward now because this New York Times poll that showed Trump being so far behind Biden apparently found that in the 6 swing states that Trump won last time, one reason he's losing this time is because people are emphasizing the pandemic more than the economy. They by apparently a fairly large margin, think you should fight the pandemic even if it hurts the economy. I forget how exactly the question was worded, but that was one of the big surprises in the poll.
Yeah. Also, they're voting with their feet. I mean, all the restaurants a few blocks up here are open, there's nobody in them.
Well, that was going to be a problem from the get-go. Yeah, I mean, I think the younger demographic tends to return. Probably younger and to some extent lower income.
Who else? I mean, I'd rather have Bannon than Karl Rove, who will advocate selling out on immigration and all the populist issues. B, he'll advocate sucking up to the business community and nothing on the left. And C, he probably wants Trump to lose. So, then
I'm all for him. I mean, that would be great. Do you think how much how premature do you think the dancing on Trump's grave is? I mean, the polls have been striking. Yeah, I think it's way premature. What are your reasons for thinking it's premature?
I mean, well, I remember the Dukakis campaign. He was up 14 or 17%. Later than this, up until the Republican convention, when Bush gave the "read my lips" speech, Dukakis was the odds-on favorite. He was double digits ahead. So you can blow a 14-point lead easily, and maybe harder now because people are set in their ways, but it's possible. And B, Trump is, he's positioned to do the secret to life, which is always panic too soon. If he panics now, he has plenty of time to correct things. The secret of Barbara Boxer's longevity in the Senate, she always panicked way before she had to. And that's an important thing. And so now it's very important that we panic him now, if you're on his side, rather than panic him in, late August.
Yeah, I think there's two reasons I would say all bets are off. One is that he's running against Joe Biden. And, I suspect that a lot of the people who are saying in these polls that they'd vote for Biden haven't paid much attention to Biden in years. Not all that many people would have watched the Democratic debates. Right. And they're probably imagining the Biden who was vice president. And the fact is, he's not as sharp as that Biden.
The conventional wisdom is Josh Barrow and John Chait, right? That Biden is running a brilliant campaign. He has run a good campaign so far, but he's never run a good campaign in his life. Why should this be the first time? I mean, the idea that once things get active, he's going to make every step correctly is insane.
Well, not only that, but he does have to show up for those three debates, or unless one of them.
Well, he could whittle it down to one, I think, maybe.
No, I think he's agreed to three. Their position now is 3. Trump wanted 5. I mean, so I don't think they can back off of that position.
There probably are ways, but okay, 3.
You can't get it down to 1. My point is, I think a lot of people, when they finally take a look at him in an impromptu, spontaneous situation, are going to be a little surprised because he's not as together as he was.
He probably doesn't want one because then if he screws that up, he's dead.
Right.
So
he wants the rhythm. How does the rhythm work? Somebody loses the first one, wins the second one, and loses the third, right? I mean, it's always like that because of the way the expectations
The incumbent president always loses the first one. The favorite always loses the first one.
Well, then that's the rhythm you want, because then expectations are so low for Trump that Trump wins the second one, and then expectations are so low for Biden that Biden wins the third one.
But that's not what happens. Obama lost the first one and I think won the next 2.
How do you remember this stuff?
And John Kerry won the first one. And
how do you remember this stuff?
I have nothing else in my brain, but I don't remember much of it.
It's impressive.
That's been talked about like in the last day, the debate cycle. Anyway, there's plenty of time for him to come back, but he doesn't seem to know what he wants to do. And this thing with the wall is just really troubling. I mean, it's like he's...
What, you mean the fact that he's saying Biden...
He said the wall is so great, they said, is Biden going to stop the wall? He said, no, he has to build it. There'll be a revolution if he does. No, his party will revolt if he does build it. If the Democrats still control any House of Congress, the wall will not be built. The other part of it is, according to Dara Lind, the Trump administration is ready to say, whatever wall we build this year, that's it. We've won. Mission accomplished. And not really push for any more, which is insane because they haven't built enough. And like all of Texas, for example, is not covered. And it shows that some wrong kind of people are in charge.
Yeah. But I mean, don't you think his problems? I mean, yeah, you need. It would be good to keep the base happy, but it seems to me the problems he's having in the polls have a lot more to do with the pandemic and the civil unrest, right? Than with. I mean, the other thing I think the poll showed is people don't think he's done a good job with either of those.
No, but he's done okay with the wall. So why would he piss away his one accomplishment by saying, "Oh, Biden will finish it too"? I mean, it makes.
I obviously wasn't. That's a smarter thing to say, but
it's obviously not as important as those other two. But to some of us, and the base, it was both important in itself and a test of whether he is an effective president. I mean, it was not a difficult thing. Build a wall, okay? If he can't get that done in 4 years, what kind of leader is he, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, he just hasn't done a lot of things he promised. He said he would get rid of Obamacare and replace it with something. I mean, don't you think it's kind of amazing that just this week they made another attempt to get the Supreme Court to get rid of Obamacare? I mean, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and he's got nothing to replace it.
I didn't follow that story. I don't quite understand. Was this a new lawsuit or just a brief they filed in some?
It's one I had already heard about, but I think they made the decision to go ahead and file this week. I could be wrong, but it's just kind of weird. Anyway,
it's totally weird. I agree. It's weird. It's I don't know. Anything he does can be justified as either appealing to the left or the right. So he could just go at random spew opinions one way or the other and think it's a strategy, right? Because, hey, I said this thing about Obamacare, that'll appeal to the right. And that's exactly sort of seems like the way not to run a campaign. The other thing I learned as a candidate, Bob, I think I said this last time, is everybody has free advice for you. So in my case,
had advice for you that you didn't follow, but I digress.
Okay. Everybody has free advice, and they're all right. In other words,
thank you.
They all have these plans where if you did them entirely, you would be better off than you are now. But you have to pick one, and that excludes the other ones, and you have to stick with it. And that's why it's a tricky decision, and that's why you need James Baker.
Yeah. I don't know about Steve Bannon right now, though. It's interesting.
You got anybody better? I don't.
No, I mean, I do think he's pretty tactically smart. But I mean, it's almost been like the last month or so of his podcast has almost been like, you know, half the time he seems like somebody wants to ingratiate himself to the Trump campaign, and the other half seems like he's actually trying to start a movement that he will lead and could be pretty intense.
And which one? It will be a yellow vest movement. He's the Nigel Farage.
I mean, I want to play you some stuff from the podcast, both stuff that he said and some stuff that another host said in his absence. He's been AWOL sometimes lately. I don't know what exactly he's up to. I don't know if he's secretly advising Trump or what, but, and I'll get to that. But, I mean, why don't we, a related thing is like, what's your take on the degree, on the Civil War issue? I mean, this week I heard a number of people say they felt that America was kind of spinning out of control. I haven't heard that many people use the term Civil War, but
I felt a little bit of that. But
you were expressing it last week when you were afraid that the police had the blue flu, which continues. And shootings are up in New York. We're up in New York and Chicago, and that may be because cops are taking it easy on the law enforcement.
Yeah. New York is the surprise there. Shootings are always up in Chicago.
No, they were way up, though.
Okay, but
last weekend.
But New York is unusual because that's usually a much safer place. I did get this. I certainly get the sense that the media and corporate America has gone batshit woke crazy. If you read the New York Times, I mean, I actually went and I bought a copy of the New York Times because I wanted to see if they were covering a particular story, and it's like a bath of woke these days. There's like half of the stories are just black bodies, then the pain, and Antifa is a hoax, and
there is one exception.
A white American who's coming to grips with racism makes the front page. Okay,
there is one exception, but go ahead. Michael Powell, and I'll get to that. But
okay, my point is this really what people want to read? Do even millennials want to read a nonstop, guilt-tripping barrage of wokedom, or they just want to know that it's there and not actually read it? Or once Trump is gone, does this stuff keep up, or is the real driving force in all this the need to get rid of Trump, and then it all goes back to normal? It's not going to go back to normal, but what does it go back to after they fired all the normal editors and put the woke people in charge? How is it going to go back to normal anyway?
Let me say first, just as a footnote, there is one exception to that. Michael Powell, who was a sports columnist there until like last night or something, I don't know. He is switched apparently for some period of time to covering, I don't know, a beat that will apparently include things like kind of free speech and stuff. And his first piece was a piece finding some feminist legal scholars to say they approved of how Trump had amended the rules on campus for adjudicating sexual harassment and sexual assault. Okay, so in other words, restoring some of the rights that males have in the adjudicatory process. And as you know, he was on the James Bennett issue. He was among the Times staffers who was saying running a Tom Cotton piece shouldn't get the death penalty.
He was sort of the only one.
Right. So I would say that's an exception. Now on how generally woke the New York Times and the Washington Post and cable TV, with the exception of Fox, is, there was this interesting column by Ross Douthat that
he's an exception too.
Well, he is, but in this case, as he noted himself, the theory he was throwing out there was kind of a left-wing theory in a certain sense. He was, talking about, it has been noted, and I'm trying to finish this damn piece so I can get my newsletter out, which, by the way, is available at nonzero.org. I'm trying to, it's on this idea that the Black Lives Matter protests show that, like, Bernie Sanders lost, because he was for class-based policy, take money from the rich, give it to the poor, whatever color they are, whereas most of the ideas coming out of these protests are more focused either on policing or on blacks per se, like reparations. And so the Times ran one piece noting this, asserting that, okay, Bernie's lost, it's not about class. Ross picked up on that and kind of had this cynical, but to my mind not implausible reading that basically the establishment has figured out that the way it can get through this without much in the way of actual cost, in other words, like without taxes being radically raised on the rich and on corporations and everything, is just to kind of, I don't know, he didn't say patronize, but kind of patronize elites of color is part of the idea, right? It's like you have these diversity hirings that will move more of them to the top of a few corporations. You get them on the media and let them have their say and so on. But in that theory, I mean, Ross wouldn't be so stupid as to say this, but in that scenario, the New York Times would just be part of that, right? I mean, they're like giving the woke their day in court as a way of defusing the movement.
Yeah, the media is, of course, exceptionally susceptible to it. But that was a very good column. Race is, race is not the radical solvent that class is. I mean, it's easy for corporate America to try to buy people off with race. It doesn't affect inequality. I tend to be with the Bernie Sanders people. I see the important issue is the underlying structure of the economy, the inequalities it raises, the way it elevates certain forms of merit, quote, merit over skills over others, and the way our lives are becoming separate and we're coming apart. And sort of making race the overwhelming issue doesn't solve any of that, really.
Well,
it's a cheap way for corporations to buy off the left. I agree with that.
Okay. So anyway, the piece I'm writing is definitely on the pro Sanders side.
The interesting point he made. Well, feel free to expand on that.
No, I agree with you. I mean, the thing I'm just arguing for old-fashioned things like taxing the rich and spending a lot on schools and healthcare and maybe a jobs program and stuff that is class-based. So it would help some people who aren't black, But I think, A, that's the way to get it done on a large scale. If you really want to transfer a lot of money and benefits to the black, especially the black lower income population, the politically feasible way to do is to...
And of course, you're for controlling immigration to raise the wages of the unskilled.
You'll be disappointed to hear that I don't get into that, Mickey. But...
Funny how you don't.
But the other thing is just that, if you look at what's being... the policy proposals coming out of... the protests are kind of meager. I mean, I will say defund the police is not as, well, it's a totally stupid phrase to use. If you look at what some of them mean by it, it's not as bad as it sounds. It's not just taking money.
No, there's...
because they want to move the money towards some community-based things that could be good and have some non-police do things that police are perhaps shouldn't be doing and are doing and so on. That's all great, but it's still small scale because it's pretty much all focused at the level of municipal spending. I mean, almost none of it's about serious federal spending except for reparations, which isn't going to happen.
Well, but the police is overwhelmingly municipal spending, and it's a lot of money.
That's my point. But by using defunding the police as the rubric under which they reallocate spending, they are A, not asking to actually expand the overall budget for spending, and B, I mean, they may say they are, but the phrase itself kind of seems to lock them in. Because when you ask them what it means, well, we're going to take money from here in the police budget and move it there. And B, you're right. A lot of the action just isn't at the municipal level. They're not going to provide health care for us. And so on.
There is also a kernel of, the problem is you can't dismiss it completely because there's a kernel of truth under the BLM movement, which is, whites do have an unconscious bias against blacks.
Sure.
And if you're a black guy, if a cop comes across the scene and there's a black guy and a white guy fighting, the automatic assumption is probably that the white, which guy do you shoot? He's much more likely to shoot the black guy, I assume. And I've seen this prejudice in myself. So but it's not something that's going to disappear overnight, and it's not something you're going to disappear in a focus group.
That's the problem. The racism is real. I mean, another related form is I think cops are more likely to be fearful of blacks or to think that the black is going to pull a gun and think that's a gun they see and shoot them.
My friends on the right claim that black cops shoot much quicker than white cops.
Well, they may be under the same apprehension. Who knows? But
they also know they're not going to be sued, or they're less likely to be sued.
But the main thing is that kind of thing is hard to legislate away, and that's why I say if we can remove, significantly decrease the number of times that people like George Floyd encounter police in an adversarial situation, that would help. You want to look at the root causes.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think it gets solved by changes in this society, not by talking about it. But the other point that Ross makes is a sort of minor point, which is that the more the elites talk in this woke babble about intersectionality and a bunch of things that the average person doesn't understand, the more that becomes the way to get ahead of the New York Times, for example, and the way to get ahead in college, it already is, and the way to get ahead in Silicon Valley, maybe. That just increases the divide between the elites that talk this woke babble and the working class people, ordinary people who don't and find it weird, and it puts them up. It means that they are up for grabs, and they're alienated from the Democratic Party in a way they weren't before, and maybe somebody who's better at it than Trump could come along and grab them for the Republican Party, which would be terrible for the Democrats and certainly terrible for your platform because. Yeah, the elites don't care. The elites don't need universal health care. They already have health care.
That's the thing, is that I think, I would go maybe a little further than you're going and say that I think there's a danger that a certain amount of what's being done now in the name of fighting racism is increasing racism among a certain demographic. Because, and I'm not saying that's a justified reaction on their part or anything. I'm just saying, given my reading of human nature, that may well be happening when and B, one virtue of class-based policies like we're gonna have a policy that's gonna help low-income people broadly. Black and white is it doesn't have that effect, and if anything, it might have a unifying effect because low-income blacks and whites have common policy cause.
How about work-based policies that appeal to values that are shared by blacks and whites? Not just give money to the.
You're talking about welfare reform or an actual jobs program?
Well, we had built this is maybe a dying Clintonian ideal, but Clinton had built a work-based welfare state. In other words, because he at least seemed not to be giving money to people who didn't work, people supported giving a lot of money to the people who did work, even if they were poor and even if they were unemployed or worked intermittently. Mm-hmm. That won't solve the healthcare problem. You need a universal system for the healthcare problem, but it solved a whole lot of the other problems. The earned income tax credit, a lot of the ways to decrease, the state could decrease income inequality. A lot could be accomplished by a work-based system, and it appeals across race lines. So why not do that? It's instead of just being an economistic and talking about, we have to give money from one class to the other.
I have a question for you. I just recorded a podcast that I haven't run yet with this guy, Rutger Bregman, who is kind of an important popularizer of universal basic income. His TED Talk is what Andrew Yang saw and got inspired by. And in terms of the incentive question with universal basic income, Mickey, if you just give people money, will they stay at home and play video games and do drugs? Is your retrospective reading of the effect of welfare reform that the incentives you hoped to see in action did or did not kick in? The idea was you take away the money that is now given to people and say you have to work for it, and they'll go to work for it. That was the idea, right?
They did kick in. The idea there are two separate versions of that. One is the marginal incentives for work, and this is the right-wing version. The marginal incentives for the work have to be great. So you can't have it so that if you work an extra hour, you lose income because your welfare benefits go down, and the so-called welfare trap. And the other is, no, forget about marginal incentives. All that matters is, do you enable a life of dependence and single-parent families? And there. I don't think welfare reform resolved that question, but it did have a huge incentive effect in that huge numbers of single mothers went into the workforce. Now, a lot of them were working before off the books, but it was a huge success in terms of pushing single mothers into the workforce. Just the signal that welfare was going to be temporary, even though that may have been a little bit of a bullshit. But they said, well, I've only have 3 years of welfare in my life. I better get to work now and save the 3 years. So there was a huge shift among women, less of a shift among the men. And that's the weird question that people have to address is why did it not have a big impact on male labor force participation? But in general, the incentive effect was there, not as great as I hoped for, but it was there. And I've seen it in myself, Bob. I inherited some money 4 years ago. I haven't done a lick of work since.
I was going to have that discussion with you.
If even hardworking Mickey can be affected, nobody is immune to the.
So you're against universal basic income? I
think so. I'm for it now. The pandemic shut down the economy.
Yeah.
The simple thing is to give everybody cash. But once the economy comes back up, I think you want to keep. Eventually, it'll be hard to avoid because society won't need people to work. Machines will be doing all the work. But so you want to keep the imperative to work as long as possible because work is centering. We evolved under conditions where work was necessary, so our psyches are geared to work. They're not geared to indolence and the lack of need. So a work requirement is a healthy thing for a society.
So can we get back to the unfolding civil war?
Do you not agree? You're the evolutionary psychologist.
Well, if you're right about the incentives, I mean, if it turns out that, it would have a bad effect by and large to guarantee people income, then and I tend to think that by and large, It's better for people to work. I'd like to see a government jobs program. I'd like to see, in effect, a guaranteed minimum income, but you make sure there's a job for them to do.
Yeah. Well, and we condition the income on the job. I mean, even the other lesson of welfare reform is people can live on a lot less money than we thought they could. So even though the UBI is only $1,000 a month, people can live on that. Okay, and so you can't get away with the argument, well, it's so low, they'll have to go to work anyway. That's actually not true, unfortunately.
So can we talk unfolding civil war and Steve Bannon?
Yeah.
So my segue, you saw this Shaun King thing?
I did not.
Oh, God.
I saw a lot of people on the left turning on him, but I didn't see what it was about.
Good. So he does this tweet. I mean, what's your take on who Shaun King is? I had almost no awareness of him. I mean, I knew the name. I knew he's like something or other. You know, he's he identifies as black. He might not be black. Well, I mean, he's pretty light-skinned. And I mean, there's actually been controversy over this, apparently. Did he always, I don't know if the controversy is, did he always identify as black or something? I don't know. One thing I noticed in looking at the blowback he got is that some of his detractors refer to him as Talcum X, which I assume is a reference to that very issue.
That's pretty good.
I don't know, but
it's the sort of thing. It's the sort of thing you can't get away with. You can't call Obama African. People go berserk when you.
In fact, I wouldn't even do what you just did, which is refer to people doing it. So anyway, so Shaun King. I had no particular opinion of him before this. Now I have a very negative one. He tweeted, yes, I think the statues of the white European they claim is Jesus should also come down. They are a form of white supremacy, always have been. Another tweet, all murals and stained glass windows of white Jesus and his European mother and their white friends should also come down. They are a gross form of white supremacy. Now, first of all, I mean, I just think that's stupid in its own terms. I mean, you go to Asia and Buddha remarkably resembles whichever ethnic group dominated the country the statue was made in. But the that like kind of that's life. But moreover, in this atmosphere, when crowds are tearing down statues rather than going through legal channels, it's not implausible to interpret this as him inciting people to go smash the windows of churches and that generally doesn't lead to great stuff. Now, do you want to hear Steve the way this was somewhat predictably taken in Steve Bannon circles?
Sure.
Oh wait, this isn't. Let me get this right. Oh damn it! I may have this podcast thing. Well, I'll. Why don't you talk while I try to find the.
Well, I know that it was interpreted on the right as they're going after the churches next. And it was as if right on cue. They were saying they're going to go after the churches next, and then Shaun King came on the scene, and they could say, see, they are going after the churches next. But I asked
my I was going to try to get a clip of Bannon doing exactly that. I asked my I have a daughter who's pretty deeply into the social justice movement, and I asked her if she knew who Shaun King was, and she hadn't seen this particular thing, but she said, yeah, he's a fake social justice warrior that everybody hates. And I think he is a little bit of a grifter, but he's got a huge following, and so people take it seriously, and I think we're about to hear Steve Bannon's reaction.
From the American History Museum, and they're now coming for Christ. Like President Trump said back in 2017, where does it end? Well, for the anarchists, it doesn't end. That's the whole point of it. Cultural Revolution, French Revolution.
So, and he goes on later about, and I mean, that's just predictable, and it's disturbing. And one feature of the modern landscape is there's just all kinds of people who have developed enough prominence, often via social media, to say outrageous stuff that will then be attributed to some group they supposedly belong to. Like Shaun King has an actual affiliation, I think, to the extent that these exist, with Black Lives Matter. It's part of his Twitter bio or something. And, I'd like to see people, Black Lives Matter, disassociate themselves from this. They haven't, but it's kind of
It's very easy for Joe Biden to disassociate himself. there's so many possible Sister Souljahs on the landscape.
I've been thinking that exact thing about
he's going to have trouble picking which one to go after. I was thinking the most obvious one is the 1619 woman at the New York Times, although she's a little too big to Sister Souljah, and also it's unfair to take her brain. But
remind me what she said. Remind me what she said that was outrageous this week. I saw it. But.
Well, they dredged it up from her college writings. That's why it's unfair. It's not something she wrote this week.
Oh, that's not fair. That was like 25 years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah. So it's like whites are barbaric and evil.
You were probably writing that in college. No.
No, but you wouldn't want to see what I was writing in college.
No, I wouldn't.
Bob, my line in college were women have been oppressed so long that we should do whatever they want. You could say I was trying to get laid.
You have changed a little, but
so I was very PC in college.
Yeah, no doubt. You were marching against the Vietnam War, which is not a crazy thing to do. So now here's another. I hope. Now I'm going to play you one more thing from Bannon's podcast on a day when he wasn't there this week, and I hope this is going to. Let's see, what is this going to be? It's about kind of things getting out of control. This brings us a little closer to civil war. I think this is a guy named Jack Maxey. Let's see.
They call your house. Here's the problem: is the mob is violent, and violence is.
That's not Jack Maxey. The next guy is
by elected officials. And
here's the solution: America is violent. But the problem is, most of us don't use that violence unless we have to. But I will tell you, if they want to start a fight, they are going to get a fight.
I think it's utter nonsense. I think it's utter.
Is that your leaf blower in your neighborhood? No. Anyway,
yes, it is.
Anyway, your microphone's just corrected for it. I think
it might be the Civil War.
It could be the Civil War coming.
But I think it's probably a leaf blower.
So you might think that the guy who intervened, Raheem something, was against the idea of using violence in response to the crazy lefties, but it turns out no, he's just predicting that that the right won't have the gumption. Here it goes.
I think it's utter nonsense. I think it's utter nonsense.
Listen, it is not true. Where's the fight
back? Where's the fight back?
I mean,
you're men and you're getting bullied around by chicken-chested kids marching up and down Connecticut Avenue, telling you that you have to put your hand up and say Black Lives Matter. Where's your fight back?
This is why I'm trying.
They're calling your bluff. And they're winning.
Hey, you know what? They're calling your bluff, and like I always say, courage is infectious, so is cowardice. People need to start showing courage.
Aside from Italians in Philadelphia protecting the...
So, I mean, this is a serious thing. I've been actually worried about this, in my... we've both been worried about disorder, and maybe that's just because we're like old guys who worry about disorder, but, in my... in the alarms I sounded about Trump's authoritarianism, which you kind of didn't quite mock, but weren't totally on board for. I mean, one stage in the scenario I was laying out was something that approaches civil war, and I counseled both sides, including my own, to just kind of like cool it on the incendiary social media behavior.
Trump is clearly not going to lead a civil war. He'll tweet law and order, and that's about the extent of it. The problem is he's not showing enough authority in terms of competently managing this thing. I hope the ruling class has a plan for somehow, ending the Great Awakening, or at least tempering it, or stopping it from going after churches and going to further and further extremes, because it sure looks like they don't have one now.
Well, I think apparently the Seattle police have significantly narrowed the geographic scope of that little autonomous zone in Seattle. They've confined it to one block. I've got to think they have plans to clear it out entirely. I think that the police have surrounded the statue in, the statue in Lincoln Park in Washington. I used to live like 100 yards from there, like on 12th Street Southeast. But you know that story? So it's got Lincoln and it's got a grateful slave on his knees being freed. And
he's not on his knees. She's rising up, Bob.
Is it a he? It's a he or she?
It's a he. We've reinterpreted that.
So,
So, but it's a weird image. I agree. It's a troubling image.
Just related to that, tell me if you've heard this, because I heard this. I do try to tune into the right wing, kind of the far right, because there is news that you don't hear otherwise. Tell me if you've heard this, that apparently some of the protesters around Lincoln Park were going into restaurants and saying, raise your hands if you think Black Lives Matter. Now, I don't know whether this was like tough-looking guys saying this, in which case it's more intimidating, or what it was.
I've seen a video. They were not tough-looking.
Oh, okay. What was it?
They were like ordinary-looking white guys, mostly. They
were guys, though.
Yeah, they're guys. There are some women. There are a couple of women.
I'm just against using any form of coercion, even peer group pressure, to get strangers to declare their political beliefs in public. It's a bad thing.
It's weird enough, and with the social media censorship sort of cranking up, that you really wonder whether there's going to have to be a samizdat society where people say what they really think, while you pledge fealty to woke ideals in public. And we're not there yet, but it's sort of happening. Everybody's trying to leave Twitter to go to Parler. And
apparently Ted Cruz went to Parler. Is the right-wing Twitter?
No, well, Gab is the really right-wing Twitter. Parler is the more respectable than Gab alternative to Twitter, I think. But you can't get on it.
What do you mean you can't get on it?
I tried to get on it. You can't get on it. It's overwhelmed.
I think the servers have had trouble holding the traffic.
They can't handle the volume. Well, they gave me an identification code, and then they said it was invalid, so I gave up on them.
But the reason...
You're on there and you're only talking to right-wingers. That's the problem.
Right. Well, that's why these guys were saying, why doesn't Trump go to Parler? There's nobody to troll. I mean, he needs the people to troll.
So do I.
I know. You got to hang out with the lefties if you're going to troll them.
How can I have a few friends I haven't alienated yet. I really have to get on it.
So here's a question for you. A little challenging question, Mickey. So you don't like to see, however modest and incremental a shift toward kind of thuggery it may be, for these guys to go in and say, raise your hand if you're for Black Lives Matter. It troubles you. And a question I have is, like, when I point to incremental drifts toward Trump's authoritarianism, like he fired 4 or 5 inspector generals or whatever it is that week, it seems to me you're always dismissive.
Well, how does it, if Black Lives Matter allies are going to restaurants and intimidating people, how does it reflect Trump's authoritarianism?
No, my point is, when I point to just incremental drift toward left-wing kind of fascism, authoritarianism, it bothers you. When I point to incremental drift toward Trump's authoritarianism, it doesn't.
Correct.
It seems to me you should either be an incrementalist or not. You should worry about increments or not. You should worry about marginal effects or not.
I think the inspector generals are on a sort of different scale. If there were I was troubled by the Lafayette Park thing. That was incremental. Okay. Any sort of use of force is on the same scale as other use of force. But the rhetoric we've heard for years and years has been Trump authoritarian, Trump is Hitler. He's not really Hitler, but he's just like Hitler. When reacts against that, and the left is just like Hitler rhetoric is just cranking up.
Okay,
so maybe I'll be a dissenter against that in 6 months.
Let me play one more clip that may or may not be what I hope it is, but I think it's going to be the same guy.
I have a better answer. The answer is Trump has shown where the limits of his authoritarianism are, and we know he's not going to do X, Y, and Z. We know he's not going to use the National Guard to impose martial law. I think you have to give that idea up, Bob.
No. My whole point was, if things get out of control, you cannot assure me of that plausibly.
Right.
If we move in the direction of actual civil war, that's my concern. Right. Of course he will.
Okay.
And by the way, he's being badgered by people like on the Band podcast to become more.
The left has not showed where its limits are. They're just ramping up.
Look, I'm concerned about that. I am equally concerned about that. I am totally not on board with a certain amount of what's going on, including walking into cafes and demanding that people profess their allegiance.
Carry on with your point. Sorry.
I'm just going to play. I think this is Jack Maxey again, and I think it's a related clip, but it may be something totally irrelevant, in which case I apologize in advance.
Side every day, Mr. President, stand up, lead as a president. You are the president. You are not a candidate. You are currently the president of these United States. You want to get on one of those statues on a horse? Start leading the army of your deplorables. We are ready.
Well, we tried.
Okay, so remember earlier, I mean, he was saying, we will fight violence with violence, and this seems to me kind of an extension of that. And I'm just. Look, this is to me a reason the left should cool it. This is almost a predictable response. And it's not one I approve of, but given what I know about the Trump's base and the number of them who have guns, I just say we could all stand to chill a little.
If the left is intimidated by Steve Bannon, that would be great. That would be
no, of course not going to happen, and they're not going to.
Not actually very fearsome.
And believe me, they don't take spiritual guidance from me either. So I don't know how you actually ratchet this down. I think it's probably being done fairly skillfully by some local authorities, but I don't know.
Well, I agree a civil war would be bad. I also agree I don't quite see how this thing ends, except that it eventually people have decided to be just a passive resistance. They're hoping it'll peter out and things will go back to normal. But I do think if Biden picked out a Sister Souljah, that would do him immense good.
Well, it'd do him immense good. It wouldn't do anything to stop this.
Oh, yes, it would. Of course it would. It would show that somebody stands up to them.
I mean, there are actual demands. I think they're trying they're trying to get the New York police budget. They want to take I think $1 billion out of $6 billion and move it into various other programs. So there are demands that I guess if met might or might not have a pacifying effect.
Right now at the New York Times, has anybody been punished for being too woke or too hysterical or too strident? No. They've only advanced, I think.
I'm not aware of that.
Now, Michael Powell seems to have been rewarded for standing up to them, but that's a little different. Nobody has said, you on the 1619, why don't you cool it? You've gone too far, or something like that.
Now, and also he's under the, he's on the repertorial side, so he's not on the opinion. Nothing he does, either in his old beat or his new beat, reflects the views on the opinion side.
That's sort of better.
Now, speaking of all this, just quickly on the Washington Post Halloween party.
Yeah.
A couple of things. Well, first of all, I made some mistakes in describing it last week. This is the famous 2-year-old Halloween party dug up, led to the this woman who wore blackface, thinking it was an anti-blackface commentary, a reference to Megyn Kelly, was shamed and left, and then two of the people who shamed her, well, one of them dug it up again and emailed the Tom Tolles, who was a host of the party, and the Post ran this long, mysterious piece that no one can figure out why they run. Did you see the piece in New York Magazine about this?
I did.
So,
its chief accomplishment was it got Wesley Lowery to piss on the Post. That was, I guess, Wesley Lowery has a beef with the Post, but his quotes were very good. He
was there. He also apparently wrote a thing against, quote, objectivity as a journalistic ideal and in favor of moral clarity. He was at the
party? Wesley Lowery was at the party?
No, I don't know that he was. No, I don't know that. I just want to say, quickly, first of all, interestingly, if you go look at the Post now, the pictures have been taken out of it. The pictures of the two complainants are not there, and the picture of the woman in blackface isn't. And I think that's probably because the two complainants got a huge amount of blowback. And, the sentiment was overwhelmingly against the piece and further shaming this already shamed lady who lost her job as a result of them running this piece. But I made a couple of little mistakes. First of all, I said they were both in their 20s. Apparently, at least one was in her 30s. I think one said it's too late for forgiveness. What she actually said was, I don't want an apology because that time has long passed. On the other hand, the other one, so one was black and one was Puerto Rican, and one One thing I only just realized is the one who revived the issue by emailing Tolles in the Post and creating the story, leading the story, was not black. She's not the one who, you'd think that the one more traumatized by blackface would be the black, and she wasn't. Anyway, let me just quickly say, she said, the one who, the woman named Gruber who did bring the thing back up, when Tolles offered to put her in touch with a woman and maybe they could work these things out, the woman who wore blackface, she replied by email, "I do not feel comfortable reaching out to a woman who publicly harassed me and my friend simply because we are not white." Again, the question of what constituted the harassment was unclear in the story. Anyway, she said, "This happened in public, and so I want a public apology, not a private one." So anyway, that's everything that was said about apology.
Your guilt about getting these incredibly minor things wrong is touching.
Thank you.
You'll never go far in this business. You think Rush Limbaugh goes back and corrects every little thing he gets wrong?
No, he is my role model.
Even I wouldn't correct those things. They're so unimportant.
Okay.
You're basically right about it. Everybody agrees that the story was out of line, and the weird thing is, why did the Post run it? And obviously, the reason is, I think the New York piece says they were worried about bad publicity if it came out because this woman was relentlessly publicizing it. So they wanted to get ahead of it by writing it themselves.
But I have a new theory. That was the theory we trotted out last week and was corroborated by this New York piece. But I also, thinking about it, thought, this happened after the James Bennett thing, and it wouldn't shock me if they were concerned about blowback from their own woke staff. I was in a communication with somebody who's on the staff of the Post who said there was at least some sentiment in favor of the two women, right, and running the piece on the staff, and that in fact some people thought it portrayed the woman who wore the blackface in an overly sympathetic light.
Well, every newspaper in the country has a petition among its black reporters demanding changes, and I'm sure the Post is no exception. Yeah. So that's a good point.
Could be
but she was asked to leave the party by the host.
Oh, and she left. She left.
I don't understand I don't understand why the.
Well, this was the question.
Yeah. Anyway, I have two things to talk about. Two other issues. One is there were three columns, and one of them was one of Ross Douthat's. He's on a hot streak. I wonder how long he can last at the Times.
I think he's getting it out there while he can. Actually, seriously, it would be very hard for them to fire him in the near term after firing Bennett. For them to act as a conservative would create problems.
Especially one as mild as Douthat. And as anti-Trump as Douthat. Poor James Bennett, he's on all the lists of. All he did was not read an article that was a perfectly reasonable op-ed by a U.S. senator that got published, and he's on all the lists of here are the people that have been the victims of our new awareness of racism.
He has. Well, you mean that's you mean the implication is that he's actually racist?
Yeah, he's on. It's like there was a it's like at Slate there was some controversy over Charles Murray and genetic racists, and somehow because all sorts of people got included on this list of who had nothing to do with it, but they had like three pictures and some of them were completely innocent. It's insane. Anyway,
but he's also on the conservative list for victims of hypersensitivity to wokeism. So he's a hero of sorts, or at least a martyr in some circles.
Well, the job was a suicide mission. It was like the episode of Star Trek where where you're trained on this thing, the Kobayashi Maru, I think it's called, where there's no way you can win. You're going to lose. You're going to be destroyed, and it's just a test of character for how well you stand up to this inevitable defeat. There was no way for him to please all sides.
But who knew things would get this wild? He was surviving, and the thinking was that he might become the next editor of the New York Times, which he would be very well suited to do.
You sort of knew, but it's like people wanted to go to the work for the LA Times. I would tell them, no, don't do that. That's a bad idea. Anyway, there's an article by Douthat. There's an article by Junan Ganesh in the Financial Times, and there was an article in Quillette.
The unofficial magazine of the intellectual dark web.
Okay, all of which were said the right has lost the culture wars. And it was a particularly good week for that because last week they lost Justice Gorsuch seemed to lose him on the LGBTQ question. And it looks like all their efforts to change things around in the Supreme Court were coming a cropper. And there were these issues. Why has the right lost the culture war? And one theory, and there were calls for this was the Quillette piece. We need to create a right culture of, that Andrew Breitbart was right. Politics is downstream of culture. We need to change the culture, not politics. So we need some sort of movement of right-wing culture. That seems hopeless to me. And I was trying to figure out why is John O'Sullivan's law that all institutions that aren't explicitly right-wing gravitate left true? And the three competing theories, I guess. One is even people in right-wing institutions want a claim and they want to get invited to parties and they want awards. And the left has managed to retain control of all the institutions, academia, celebrity, that give out those awards, the media. The second is that I guess the second and third are really the same, which is there's a natural dialectic where the left just wins the culture wars. As people get richer and freer, they want to marry who they want. They don't want to be stuck in marriages they don't like. So the divorce rate's going to go up. Single parenthood's going to rise. Gays are going to come out of the closets. It's just a function of greater prosperity. And you could argue some sort of dialectic of freedom that the left wins and the right should just sort of give up. And I don't know which of those I agree with.
Wait, maybe I'm a little confused. I mean, so
one says we've lost. The right loses. I didn't say the word "we" there, Bob. I
didn't hear it. No.
One thing says the right has lost because it didn't control the media in Hollywood. Okay. And the other says the right's loss is inevitable. It's the product of deep cultural inevitability that cannot be reversed, and they're going to lose. They're going to keep on losing.
Well, it does. Don't you think that the loss of most of these culture wars is just consistent with the general drift of history over the last 2,000 years or so? I mean, I don't want to, I mean, there have been bumps in the road, but I mean,
yes, although I draw the line at losing the war on the value of work. In other words,
well, you don't
have to say work schmirk. We're going to a UBI. That's a huge cultural shift. And I don't think that's inevitable. Maybe
right.
it is.
But the idea that, first of all, you shouldn't be discriminated against on the basis of inherited characteristics, whether they are race or body shape or sexual orientation. There's a pretty long drift of that, certainly encompassing more than a century. Abortion, say, is a slightly trickier issue, but in general, I mean, this reminds me of,
abortion is definitely trickier. That's like work. Yeah. There's no reason why we couldn't have a society that
I think it's a difficult moral issue.
Values life more than choice.
Well, of course, whether you frame it that way is a question. But I agree, it's a difficult moral issue. But the let me just throw in one thing, an afterthought I had that's related. Last week we were asking, why do Supreme Court justices more often drift left once they're on the court than right? And a theory we didn't throw out there is that they're worried about how they're going to be depicted by historians 30 years from now, and they see that the overall drift is left on social kind of cultural issues.
Oh, sure. That's the legacy card or the obituary card that gets played all the time. Okay. It gets played against me all the time.
So that suggests so the Supreme Court justices are buying the second of your two theories more, right? I mean, the second of your two theories is more of a drift of history thing, although not as thoroughgoing as the one I threw out.
It could be just the right is losing because it doesn't control the media, and the justices say, we're so far behind, we'll never control the media. It's not inevitable, but I know a losing hand when I see one. So if I want an obit, I have to move to the left. Also, they get clerks from law schools, and the right still hasn't, the clerks would tend to be further left than the justices, I think, even if there's a huge federalist presence at law schools. Mm-hmm. They want to get invited to parties, and it's no fun being seen as a crazy right winger in Washington, even when the Republicans are in charge. So
okay, but still, if they're worried about the history books 30 years from now, they seem to see long-term forces at work, I would say, if that's indeed the thing. Yeah,
but they could just,
it's not just a question of who's going to have the media next year, who's going to control the media next year.
Be. It is. The history is written by the winners, so you're being a bet on who's going to be the winner.
Of course, the whole issue of media control is more complicated now. Anybody, this isn't 1968. Where you had to get permission from the government to have a TV station.
Right. But the idea that the right is somehow going to have a presence in Hollywood is completely absurd. The people that go into drama are not right-wingers.
Clint Eastwood's movies get awards. They don't just get, American Sniper, was it El Camino? I haven't seen it.
Gran Torino, but that wasn't I thought that was a plea for racial reconciliation.
Oh, was it?
That would be Clint Eastwood going for his legacy.
But didn't it see Trumpism coming, kind of?
Probably, but I haven't seen it. But
I haven't either, so maybe we should see some.
But I don't think Clint Eastwood is immune to these, and he's his own man. He says he has some leftish views and some rightish views, but it's Rick Hertzberg wrote about this when we were at the New Republic. The people that go into theater are left wingers because they believe in. They believe in emotion as opposed to looking at the marginal incentives of the tax code. So you're never going to get Hollywood being right wing. What's happened recently is the stupidity of Hollywood has, thanks to the internet, has become the stupidity of the whole nation because everybody reveres Hollywood people in their clumsy left-wing way when normally they would just be confined to Hollywood and the rest of the nation would get about its business. Now when a movie star tweets attacking Trump, all of a sudden everybody thinks the guy's a great sage.
I don't agree that emotionalism is naturally or inherently left-wing. Listen to Steve Bannon's nationalist appeals. it's you can almost hear Wagner playing in the background. It's like, don't you feel the stirring of nationalism within you? I'm serious. It's not a particularly rational story he's telling. In some ways it is, but you can understand how he's tugging at the heartstrings of his.
And would those people go into the theater? That's the question.
You mean is there a different kind of emotionalism?
Correct.
I don't know.
I guess,
but I don't agree that the right is rational and the left emotional. That's nuts.
But people did go into the theater in Nazi Germany. There was,
of course,
but I think it was harder for them than going to the theater elsewhere. There was a mediocre movie called Mephisto made about this. Mm-hmm. It was an incredible performance by Brandauer, but he was a guy trying to make it in the theater in Nazi Germany, and how much would he sell out was the issue.
So, do you have any? Speaking of which, any cultural recommendations? Or are you not through with your list of?
No, everybody raves about Watchmen, and I'm worried that it's going to be too left wing for me.
I never got into the comic book
inspired by, but everybody says I didn't either. But then I watch Watchmen, and it's so good that I like it. It's inspired by Ta-Nehisi Coates. That's what puts me off.
You're not a Ta-Nehisi fan? By the way, James Bennett. I like his
writing. I like him as a person, but I don't want people who are inspired by him.
Talk about the injustice of James Bennett being a victim of wokeism. Who put reparations on the map? Who published Ta-Nehisi Coates on reparations in the Atlantic famously before anyone I knew was talking about it?
No, Bennett did, of course. But,
absolutely.
It's
but
he may be too mild-mannered for his own good. If he boasted more about it, maybe it would help him more. Anyway, I'm not worried about him. I think he'll land on his feet, but it's a disaster. It's stupid.
Yeah, it's I think was an overreaction to say the least.
Two other things are people are now, constantly thinking of Trump in the past tense. We're talking about the post-Trump world.
I will never. I am not talking that way. I am superstitious.
But it's worth talking about what happens to the Republican Party. What happens to the Democrats.
I'm superstitious.
If you supported a sane Trump and you were stuck with an insane Trump, you're worried about what will happen to Trump's party after he leaves. Will the establishment call Rose, who only care about tax cuts and foreign wars and more cheap immigrant labor, take over? Or will the Steve Bannon nationalist wing somehow win out? And obviously the Jeb Bushes of the world are going to try to take over, but certainly on immigration, the rank and file, this is the one thing that has changed. The rank and file is now totally in Bannon's camp. As you've seen, like a lot of the times in primary races, the Republican primary, there was a recent Republican primary where there were two of them where a standard right-wing Republican was beaten by a right-wing Republican on the issue of immigration. It's just an interesting political question. Nobody knows what's going to happen.
Could be the end of the two-party system.
Nobody knows what happens to it's very hard to end the two-party system in the American system because if you don't have a majority of the electoral votes, you don't win. So... but
there's going to be a lot of. I mean, it seems there's a pretty big Trumpist base that if the Republican Party totally ignores it, as you're imagining, which of course is a nightmare to you, and that's why you're imagining it. But if it happened, that would be a pretty big chunk of the electorate potentially up for grabs. Now Trump would be 78. I'm not sure I see him running, but
he might.
It's been known to happen. There are 78-year-old people who are running. Is that exactly how old Biden is?
I don't know. He's pretty old. But I definitely think Trump will run again if he loses. One possibility is that he may just become an unperson. In other words, he tries to run. My friend John Ellis thinks he's going to buy a media property. Has written about this. He's going to start a new network, an alternative to Fox.
OAN, is that the French?
There are a bunch of alternatives. There's not just OAN. There's some other ones, and not just Sinclair. I think there are other ones, and some of them are being ginned up by greedy Wall Streeters who don't care about the right wing, but sense a business opportunity. Fox makes $2 billion a year. They can grab $1 billion of that. Trump will say things, he'll try to say, and the public will just ignore him. They'll say, screw you, you had your chance, you blew it, see you later. I think that's a very likely scenario, that people will turn on him with a suddenness and a ferocity and they'll just ignore him, which is the most vicious thing you could do to him. That's one possibility. And also what happens to the Democratic Party? What happens to, Joe Biden? Everybody thinks Joe Biden's going to be able to rein in the left. Good old centrist Joe Biden. I'm not so sure.
This is when you need Bernie Sanders. Two birds with one stone. On the one hand, he converts some of the Trump base to Democrats. And on the other hand, his economic proposals are so radical that the left forget about wokeism in other realms. I don't know, but
that didn't happen.
What do you mean?
And
we
also
didn't do the experiment. Well, they didn't support him.
They had a campaign.
You know what I'm told, interestingly, is that a lot of the people who are part of the demonstrations are actually Sanders supporters, which shouldn't be shocking. And make of it what you will, but
especially if you've ever met Sanders supporters. I mean, they were definitely
more broadly woke than him.
No, they were 3 degrees scruffier than anybody else's organizers. So you'd go to a Pete Buttigieg rally, and there'd be some button-down college student feeding your name into the computer. And you go to a Sanders rally, it'll be organized by some guy who just woke up in his car, and like he'd be stretching. And the Sanders rallies were just as well run, but they were run by people who were one step closer to being in the movie Clerks than anybody else's. So you could see that they would turn into rioters. But they also had this left wing thing that we think they would resist being woke. Woke is not the right word for them. Scruffy is the word for them.
Well, I mean, the Democratic Party has just not worked out the tension between identity politics and, kind of economic leftism, class-based policy. And I would be for Sanders if he hadn't sold out on immigration instantly. He did do that. He did do that.
And the other thing is,
I wouldn't necessarily call it sold out, but yeah, he did.
Railing at millionaires and billionaires completely misstates the problem of inequality and class in modern society. It's not the billionaires; it's the top 30%.
No, they're just kind of totems.
It's the meritocratic elite. No, but you listen to Sanders, you think billionaires really are the problem. He's miseducating people.
Well, but it's effective rhetoric. I don't know if he really believes it. So,
why wouldn't honesty be effective?
So, Mickey, one commenter called us the Torville and Dean of American political commentary. Do you know who they are?
No.
I looked it up. They were an ice skating pair. I want to be Dean. And then one said, I would compare you two to Dr. Kimball and Lieutenant Gerard. You get that reference too, right? You need a lonesome, soulful outro. You remember at the end of every episode, Dr. Kimball would be like heading toward another town where he would almost be uncovered almost be nabbed by the police.
Is this MASH we're talking about?
No, it's The Fugitive. It's A Fugitive. No. David Jansen.
I didn't watch The Fugitive, even though it was it ended in my neighborhood in Venice.
Oh, I totally watched it. No, I like. The 60s are a rich place for mining comparisons to us.
You don't think we should declare ourselves an autonomous zone, Bob?
That's a possible name. Oh, speaking of which, what names have been suggested?
The Pangolin Autonomous Zone.
Someone suggested Erudite Pangolin for Snobs as a title, which suggests to me that we may have exhausted our reserves of viable Pangolin-based podcast titles. I mean, it has its virtues. Another one says, Bob unwittingly came up with a perfect podcast name. Apparently I said, quote, I would never say that. And that's his suggestion.
What about paranoid pangolins? You got alliteration there.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think Boomer Doomcast is bad. I keep coming back to that. I didn't think it up. Oh, and then here's and on the question of us monetizing this, Mickey, a guy says a person says I'd pay to watch your retractions, and I'm a woke millennial. I think we had alluded to the possibility of taping something after this where we talk about things we regret having said.
Well, it'll be a ripoff of Harry Shearer, whose radio show has the apologies of the week, and he has all the people who've apologized, while a soundtrack of somebody saying "I'm so sorry, Uncle Albert" plays in the background. So
I know Harry Shearer is one of the geniuses of American culture.
He has one flaw.
What is that?
Well, this happened this past week. There's this very prominent Democratic fundraiser jumped out at 27th floor window, Steve Bing.
Steve Bing, the casino guy?
No, that's Wynn.
Steve Wynn. Who is Steve Bing?
Steve Bing is the heir to a real estate fortune who used to pal around with Ron Burkle and Bill Clinton.
And he killed himself, we think?
He killed himself. We think he killed himself. He was depressed, blah, blah, blah. But it's a classic story it's rich with gossipy detail. This guy was a staple of the gossip pages. He had fathered a child with Elizabeth Hurley. He had high-profile romances. He palled around with Bill Clinton. He was investigated by Anthony Pellicano. He either hired, or if you say he hired Anthony Pellicano, they sue you for libel, so I'm not saying that. But Anthony Pellicano is in the picture. It's just incredibly rich. And, of course, the LA Times didn't have a story the next day because the LA Times is allergic to gossip and wouldn't know a good story if it bit them in the ass. So I wrote about this, and I remember once complaining that the LA Times hadn't covered Lindsay Lohan mowing down a row of trees on Sunset Boulevard sufficient to how great a story it was. And Harry sort of objected and said, well, that's just tabloid. He wants the LA Times to focus on the important things.
So we've gotten to Harry's big weakness?
Harry's big weakness is he has an anti-tabloid sensibility.
Oh, God, that's unforgivable.
Even though he's hilarious. I was once on a comedy show with him, and it was Dennis Miller's show, and I was like, I made my three... it was before he went totally right-wing. And I made my two little jokes, and then Harry Shearer and Dennis Miller just went to town, and they were on like 5 levels of comedic talent above me. Harry Shearer is just hilariously funny.
I did a podcast with him. I did. There's one in our annals, in our archives.
Anyway, I just wanted an excuse to bring up the Steve Bing thing. I think it's a...
That was good. I thought you were heading for Jeffrey Epstein territory, but no.
Well, I don't think it's a similar story to Epstein, but not as scandalous. And I don't know of any connection between them.
Have you not watched the Netflix Jeffrey Epstein?
I still have not watched. I will post
documentary.
I will post this. I will send you a link to a very good story by Rachel Abramowitz about Steve Bing, which, if you read it, will tell you why he's an interesting character.
That's what I aspire to know, Mickey. Above all. I woke up this morning...
Don't mock me, Bob.
Why is Steve Bing an interesting character? It's like I've gotten to the bottom of the mind-body problem, but I have one question remaining. Why is Steve Bing an interesting character?
You've gotten to the bottom of the mind... I thought your resolution was that consciousness is a miracle.
That's the bottom of the mind-body problem.
Okay, well...
So
time to move on to Steve Bing. You're right.
Maybe time to wrap this up. We've been going a long time, hour and 36 minutes. Don't know what a record is.
Not that, but I'm happy to end it.
Yeah, I'm not insisting. I enjoy this. I could do this all day, and I could cut it off now, tape more, and then charge people like $100 a head to watch it. We could do that.
We always have this thing at the end where you try to convince me to take money, and people are sick of it. Let's not do it this time.
I already did it, but look, it's a serious... Okay, so we won't do that, but I will say that if people want to support independent media, they could go to the Patreon for the Nonzero Foundation, which supports Blogging Heads TV and Meaning of Life TV and stuff, including my newsletter, which should be out, I don't know, within 24, 36 hours of us posting this Friday night. By the way, speaking of the founding of Blogging Heads, younger viewers may not know that you and I were co-founders along with Greg Dingle. I did find that there was a Tom Tolles caricature of you and me done on the 5th anniversary, which was 10 years ago. And I don't want to share it with the world.
Okay, I guess then I do.
You would. It's so much more flattering for you, I think. I'm looking at it right now. It's right over there. I could get it if I wanted to, but I don't.
And you're not even going to post it online? No.
Oh, quite the opposite.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's because I went to Tom Tolles' Halloween party and you didn't.
No, so. I think it's because he aptly depicted you as a good person and me as a more dubious person. So
I do recommend a haircut. They're good.
For me? I thought you said my hair looked great.
You don't need one, but they're, now it looks awful.
A razor head.
But having your haircut makes you feel better.
Unless you get COVID-19 while it's happening. My daughters have reminded me, like, it isn't just dying. I said, like, I'm not going to die from COVID. And they're like, but a lot of people have weird persistent symptoms, permanently impaired lung functioning and stuff.
Yeah, or a permanently impaired brain function, yeah.
And you're like an old guy whose brain and lungs are going downhill anyway. They don't say that part, but that's what they're thinking.
That's certainly true in my case.
No, you're actually holding up pretty well. You're older than me and at least as alert as I am mentally.
I don't think
so. Like, what was that thing you remembered that I complimented on? See, I've forgotten it already, and it was only like half an hour ago, and you heard it a whole day ago and remembered it.
There you go. Stick with this line of thought.
Okay, anything else? Tell them what your Twitter handle and newsletter name are. Your Twitter handle is kausmickey.
Twitter handle is kausmickey. I haven't been able to get on Parler. I have a Substack newsletter like everybody else on the planet, apparently.
Hey, don't belittle us.
And it's called Kausfiles.
Mine is called the Nonzero newsletter.
And one of these days I will put out a new Kausfiles. I've written a long legal thing, and it's too boring to put out as a standalone. I'll just, that's the other problem with the newsletters is you have to keep up reader interest. On the radio, if you give them any reason to switch the channel, they'll switch the channel. So you can't have one bad segment. So the same thing with newsletters. You can't have one bad newsletter because then they'll never come back.
Well, yeah. In fact, the problem with newsletters is the only time you lose subscribers is when you put a newsletter out. Like, nobody remembers to unsubscribe until you send them a newsletter.
That's my secret.
Never send them out. That's my secret.
That's right. That's like
I thought that was my secret.
People said that Radar was the greatest magazine ever before, when it was in the planning stages, because they were constantly hearing stories about how wonderful Mayor Rashan's articles in Radar were going to be. And the only thing that could dispel this was if he actually published the magazine.
Exactly.
And he was much too smart to do that. So there you go.
So, but anyway, I am going to put one out soon. I think it's going to be big.
You've already given it away, but I'll read it.
No, there's a whole second piece on George Floyd and foreign policy. You'll never guess. But and there's other stuff. It's virtually a magazine.
Okay.
Anything else?
Nope.
Okay. So we think we'll see people next week. Thanks everybody. Smash that like button on YouTube and send us large sums of money. Anything else?
Nope, unless you want to have a secret word.
Oh, that they can, just to prove that they listened until the end?
Yeah.
Well, I'm kind of tired. Maybe you should come up with it. I mean, there's always shibboleth.
Something Steve Bannon-esque?
What is something Steve Bannon-esque? By the way, here's the alarming thing about Steve Bannon. Have you seen the Errol Morris Steve Bannon thing? You definitely watch that. You should definitely watch that. But he predicts there will be a revolution. That's what's alarming. It's like he wants a revolution, and like we're at a period where it's becoming a less crazy aspiration.
And that's not just bluff. And
I don't know. I can't figure out which part of him is real and which part of him is tactical hyperbole. It's I don't know exactly where the line is. It's somewhere because it's. Okay. But
tactical hyperbole will be the secret word.
Okay, the secret phrase will be tactical hyperbole. And if you deploy it in comments on Blogging Heads TV or on YouTube or on Twitter, we'll know that you're for real.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. See you, Mickey.
Take care.